Hi, welcome to episode 27 of CultureWatch Radio. I'm Andrew Smith, and with me is Bill Muhlenberg. Bill, it must be amazing to go to YouTube and see before you the scope of the censorship on that platform.
Yes, well, it would be, Andrew, if you could see it. But of course, when they pull things, you can't see it. That's the whole point. Videos are meant to be seen. And as we've discovered, YouTube is quite happy to pull any video that doesn't fit the narrative, doesn't go along with their radical left agenda. So yeah, after first of all my big ban with Facebook, which I thought was bad enough, now we're seeing YouTube get into the act. Of course, plenty of others have known this for a long time. Even President Trump has had his run-ins with tech giants, and well, thankfully now he's doing a class action lawsuit against some of these guys. So I'm happy for him to do it. I hope he wins, and hopefully the coattail effect will help people like you and me who also feel the censorship fingers of these tech giants.
So what happened, Bill? That episode 25 video where we put the audio equivalent in a video up onto YouTube, that had been there for a week.
Yeah. Well, look, it was on a subject that evidently YouTube and all the other giants don't allow you to think independently on. We did look at the virus, lockdowns, mask wearing, vaccines, all the things you're not supposed to talk about, obviously, at least if you're trying to give an alternative point of view. So I guess part of my problem here, I wanted to make the title a bit more clear to the audience so they knew what it was about. So as soon as I switched the word slightly and added the word COVID to the title, within minutes, I was informed that this was taken down. So obviously their algorithms or whatever, their army of censors, as soon as they see the C word, they go straight to it, and any line that differs from the party line will be terminated. That is verboten, as we've seen so often now. You just cannot think independently. You cannot speak independently. And if you do, you will be censored.
News that's just come out during the week in Germany. YouTube has been fined €100,000 for ignoring a court order to reinstate a video removed under their misinformation excuse. They'd actually taken a month to finally do something in terms of restoring the video, but the court decided, no, that's just not on. Would this show that what YouTube is doing is an agenda with a philosophy rather than a neutral community protection mechanism?
Well, no question. I would think it is pushing an agenda. It is not objective. It is not being neutral. If it were, it would allow all points of view, with obvious exceptions of libel and, shouting fire in a crowded theater. There's a few things you don't do, but free speech otherwise means, and so does democracy, it means giving all points of view a fair hearing. But when you totally destroy, put down, censor, ban alternate voices, well, something's going on, and it's certainly not a question of fairness and objectivity.
Yeah, and it's been said previously, nothing of value has ever been brought about by censorship.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, it destroys democracy, it destroys freedom. Again, there's these exceptions, shouting fire in a crowded theater where you really can endanger life. But generally speaking, censorship is detrimental. I mean, sure, hardcore porn, you might talk about publishers not running with that, but that's certainly not our problem today. Today, we have publishers like Amazon or booksellers pulling books that, again, go against the secular left narrative. So you think of Ryan Anderson, his excellent book on the trans agenda. That was pulled. So it's interesting. We see Germany taking some of these tech giants to court. Well, it was in Germany last century, right? We had this thing called book burnings, big piles of books that were verboten, that were illegal under Nazi Germany, were pulled from people's homes, thrown in the streets, and set alight. I'm trying to think how YouTube pulling videos, Facebook taking down pages, Twitter pulling tweets, Amazon banning books. How is that in any way different than the Nazis burning books back in the 30s and 40s? So I think this is bad news all around, and we really better learn from the lessons of history.
Well, we've probably seen this in Australia already back in February when Facebook blocked all the news pages. Now, if the tech giants can control at will the ability to communicate with citizens, at what point is the elected nation state unable to effectively govern?
Well, as we've said before, these tech giants do have, in effect, monopoly powers. They're acting as public utilities, much like the telephone companies in the past did. As such, they provide a public service. But if you have monopoly power where real competition is barely allowed, I mean, we have so many little teensy-weensy tech alternatives, but monopoly powers are given to YouTube, to Twitter, to Facebook. So they're getting away with murder. But worse than that, what we now seem to find is we have this unholy trinity of both big tech and, often the big state. In fact, throw in big pharma when it comes to things like COVID, and you have them all singing from the same song sheet. They're all running with the same official narrative, and they're all preventing other points of view from being heard. In fact, just this week, we learned in WA, speaking of big government, the Labor government there has banned Christians from using venues in WA. ACL wanted to use some for conferences. Labor has said anybody who dares to say anything that goes against official Labor Party policy and beliefs will not be allowed to use these venues. So cancel culture is not just with YouTube and Facebook. Governments, leftists of all sorts are into cancel culture, and certainly us, people who like to think independently and be widely read and not just go with the narrative, we are the subject of this cancel culture. So again, think Germany in the 30s, that was cancel culture. Think Soviet Union, Eastern Europe under the communists, that was cancel culture. And more in the West, we're seeing the same thing here. How long before freedom and democracy are no more in Australia and the West?
Yeah. Indeed, YouTube's policy against disinformation means that only the anointed government chief medical officer gets to decide what information is valid. Yet thousands of other doctors are just as well trained, and they can also think, yet are subject to either censorship or possibly retribution. Surely becoming the CMO must be the medical equivalent of being voted the next pope.
Well, he does seem to have this kind of infallibility about him, doesn't he? Each of the states have their unelected, unrepresentative, unaccountable medical advisors and officers who, well, A, they're just kind of making things up as they go along. B, they often disagree with one another, even themselves. And C, as you say, the often some of the best medical scientific advice we're getting is from those who are taking a different point of view than what these health officers are telling us. We've got a handful of cases again back here in Victoria. So once again, they're talking more lockdowns, more restrictions. Why am I not surprised? This is the mantra. This is their fallback position, instead of proportionality, instead of targeting at-risk groups, instead of very specific restrictions and quarantine where it's needed, it's the old mantra. We'll just shut down the whole state. Everybody suffers. Of course, public servants, so-called, they don't suffer. They get their salaries. Small businesses, they suffer big time. Thousands of businesses are closing down here in Victoria. But again, as you say, these so-called chief health officers, it's policy on the run. It's not evidence-based. It's not based on the data. And at least if it is, we're certainly not seeing this data. Why don't they show us the data, what lies behind all these draconian pronouncements? So, yeah, it seems we do have some new papal infallibility doctrines being reared in most of these labor states.
So, Bill, what do we do? How do we sidestep this constrainment of information that we're allowed to hear?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. We do have, as I say, some teensy-weensy, smaller alternative media sites, right? I'm on 4 at least, and might join another few. People keep adding names, MeWe and Rumble and Parler, Telegram. That's one way to do it. The alternatives, they're much, much smaller, much more limited in outreach. My own website, CultureWatch, is obviously an alternative to the mainstream media. Your great weekly interviews is another way we can get truth out in the public arena. So, yeah, the sky's the limit in one sense as to what individuals can do. But when you're up against the mighty monopolies of the tech giants, and when they are in bed with big government all pushing the same agenda, it gets more and more difficult. Again, we can learn the lessons of history. I've talked about Sophie and Hans Scholl, the teenagers in Germany during the Second World War. They didn't have Twitter. They didn't have YouTube. They would just crank out little flyers, circulate them in the universities. That was their way of offering resistance. That was their alternative media. Of course, eventually they were caught and executed by the Gestapo. But here, we get caught and we get at least our pages executed, our videos are killed. So we're not quite losing our lives yet, but really, is it many more steps until something even more draconian happens? So this is a real fight indeed.
Well, at least we can do stuff right now. As always, more information is available at Culture Watch, and we'll see you again next week with another episode of Culture Watch Radio.